Live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a lot coming up for you, including the latest allegations from Turkey against Saudi Arabia over a murdered journalist. We have the debate over how Facebook uses your data, as well as the ugly tone of political comments against Theresa May. All right, it's time to meet our panel for tonight. I'm joined by Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. And we're also joined by Hilde Woutmans, a Belgian MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. She's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Subcommittee on Security and Defense. Okay, big story today. Now, in the last few hours, there have been some dramatic developments in a story that MEPs have been debating here in Strasbourg, the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Reports are emerging that body parts belonging to the Washington Post columnist have been found in the garden of the Saudi Consul General's home in Turkey. Now, this comes as NBC News revealed that the kingdom officials had allegedly organized a months-long campaign to lure Khashoggi back to Saudi Arabia. And today, explosive allegations from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said Saudi Arabia planned the Khashoggi murder in advance and had been plotting against him since late September.
Cemal Kaşıkçı'nın vahşi bir cinayete kurban gittiğini gösteriyor. Bundan sonra kendilerinden meselenin en altından en üstüne kadar tüm sorumlularını açık yüreklilikle ortaya çıkarmalarını ve hukuk önünde gereken cezaya çarptırmalarını bekliyoruz. Cinayetin anlık bir hadiseden kaynaklanmadığı, planlı bir operasyonun ürünü olduğu yönünde elimizde güçlü emareler bulunuyor.
All right, so we're seeing tough words there from the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I want to start with his tone, really taking a tough stand. Is this genuine or is this a political opportunity that he's taking? I'll ask you, Darren.
Well, I think in many regards, first of all, this is a little bit risky for Turkey in some regards. Of course, he's looking for an investigation into this. It happened essentially on Turkish soil, and the consulate was based in Turkey. But, you know, there is an awful lot of power play here in the Middle East in part. We've got Iran on one side, Saudi Arabia on the other, and Turkey in some of the conflicts caught up somewhat in the middle. So he does have to be concerned about the wider context. But I think, he has found a pressure point here. And is he right as a leader to demand answers? He is. Many people would, of course, say, given Turkey's role in the world and indeed its internal politics, it might be slightly ironic and indeed rich coming from Erdogan. But, he is on this point at least got the argument that everyone wants to find out.
And he was put in the position where he had to respond. Yeah. Hilde, I will ask you, because today MEPs, have been talking about this. Is Saudi Arabia is a key ally? How determined, or is there really an appetite in the European Union to actually go against that strategic partnership? It's an ally, it's a key ally.
Well, what I hear today in debate is that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi is really a game changer. We had a debate 2 weeks ago already on Yemen and the role of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and 8 million people who are facing death by starving. And there we debated already the role of Saudi Arabia. But now I think what we see now, and the brutal murder and all the allegations and all the suspicious things around it, I think this murder is a game changer. I think what I feel now in the European Parliament here in the debate is that everybody asks for a tough investigation, but also to take some actions. Mogherini was very clear on that. We want actions to be taken. Merkel said it already. Angela Merkel said we have to make a ban on arms export. I think that's very important.
No one actually followed her after she was saying that.
I think that's part of the problem is that, we might hear tough words in Strasbourg today, and indeed we've heard tough words from lots of leaders over the last week or so. But what people want is action. Yes. And when you look at the statistics, almost half of Britain's exports to Saudi Arabia, sorry, weapons go to Saudi Arabia. Not far behind them were Belgium.
Belgium, you've got Wallonia.
In Flanders, we don't export anymore, and today we really
but Wallonia does.
Yeah, we put pressure really on the Walloon government to stop that also.
I think it has to come at a national level. In some ways, this is just a talking shop that can go as well. It can't. It cannot sanction.
No, that's why today also Guy Verhofstadt said very clear in the plenary: if we really want to take Europe to take actions, we have to stop unanimity. Now we can only take action while all the 28 member states say yes to something. We have to stop by that.
Isn't it proof enough when Angela Merkel said, "Everybody, please, let's do this," and no one actually followed after what she said?
No, but I really think that people will follow. I think we can't close our eyes anymore. I think what's happening there, how can you trust a country that kills journalists by weapons? You can't export weapons anymore.
I know, but there are many countries that do that.
Yes.
You know,
Flanders takes a good role.
Yeah, indeed, but Turkey locks up more journalists than any other country in the world, and yet it's still on an accession process to join the European Union. In saying that, I think part of the problem, though, as well, is that actually MEPs aren't necessarily absolutely united
you were talking to them,
on what action should be taken. As you say, I got a chance to try and talk to some of them earlier on today, and let's have a listen to what they had to say.
There is a red line to be drawn against countries that behave internationally like rogue states.
Well, the case for arms sales to Saudi Arabia has never been a strong one, given the role of Saudi Arabia in the attacks on Yemen. It's not that things should be stopped because of the murder of a journalist. They should have been stopped years ago.
Of course they are going too far, and I think that's the reason why we have to see now a fact-based debate and what could be the sanctions or the results out of this fact-based debate.
Finland, my home country, has not stated officially anything, and I think they should as well. And the problem is that we don't have coordinated systems in the European Union, and that would help as well.
One of the problems is that there are competing interests in arms sales, and even the European Union has never really had a credible position among its member states on common policies in this area.
I think we need to wait and see what's happened and investigate that properly before we make a hasty decision.
No? Okay. It's about Saudi Arabia, just for 2 seconds. No, just Darren from Euronews.
I don't speak English, sorry.
No? You sure? We can do it in French. For 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Just about Saudi Arabia. Right, just Darren from Euronews. Just ask you really quickly about Saudi Arabia. What about the tens of thousands of Europeans' jobs, though, that depend on arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
You really think so? I think that's a stupid excuse.
Well, that was interesting. Even those that didn't want to answer your questions, actually, Darren.
Yeah, and I think it is a difficult task. You know, as much as people do want to take a natural kind of hard line on this, and, you know, clearly a man has been murdered here, and that is not good. But, you know, tens of thousands of people's livelihoods in Europe do matter, and they do count on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And if everyone did follow Angela Merkel's lead, that would clearly put those jobs and those livelihoods at risk. When you listen
to the tone, like Hilda, you are very optimistic saying this is a game changer, but when you listen to the tone, it seems like it's not actually. Is it really a game changer? Because they're conflicting interests.
I really hope so, because the last months even, we voted a lot of resolutions here on Saudi Arabia. We discussed the blogger who's in prison and who's being tortured.
Exactly, and nothing really has changed.
No, but with Angela Merkel, I'm really hopeful that they will follow. I can't promise you. Unfortunately, economics goes beyond human rights. Not for me as a liberal. I really think we should take action now. We can't close our eyes anymore. And for me, it's not only the death of the journalist, it's also the war in Yemen, it's also the 150 executions a year in Saudi Arabia on an open marketplace because, for example, you're homosexual, you have been killed by a sworn. I think we should
really
not close our eyes.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, you know, we talk about economics trumping. When you look at the figures and all of this, you know, in terms of sales, arms sales to Saudi Arabia, 50% almost comes from the United Kingdom. They're a big player. Belgium is second. Followed behind them is Sweden.
Yes.
Germany is way, way down that list. Hence why Angela Merkel can afford to call off future, it's not even current one, future arm deals. And unsurprisingly, at least Donald Trump to a degree has been honest when he says that actually American jobs depend on this because they are by far the largest arms exporter to Saudi Arabia.
We'll wait and see if action is actually taken rather than words. All right, really another story we're watching tonight because the European Commission has rejected Italy's budget proposal, giving it 3 weeks to resubmit. The move comes a day after the Italian government refused demands from Brussels to modify it. The Commissioner Pierre Moscovici said the opinion adopted today by the Commission should come as no surprise to anyone, as the Italian government's draft budget represents a clear and intentional deviation from the commitments made by Italy last July. All right, you know, Italy wants, they have 3 weeks to respond. I think after that they will have to adjust their budget deficit. If they stand their ground, is this even, I was reading that it's a bigger problem than Brexit, actually, if Italy goes down the drain. What do you think?
Well, I think Italy should modify, of course, its budget when Europe asks it. I think it's very necessary. If you want to keep the Eurozone, if you want to keep the budget flat, they have to change it.
But don't they have the right to actually just to fulfill their mandate? Why is it when the EU says something?
You're part of the European Union, then you also have to fulfill what we ask you on the budgetary side. So I really hope that they can go on and talk with Europe and change their budget, yeah. And the Brexit, of course, it's really a big problem, I think. It's not going forward anywhere.
I think what's also interesting is that the markets have been really reacting today.
Yeah, they have, and not necessarily in a good way. And we'll have to see, how far the populist line stalls on this. When you look at the budget deficit, it is potentially under these plans, what they've proposed, only 2.4%. That is well below the 3% actually, which is when you break the rules. The problem for the Italian government is that they are, according to the European Union and indeed to those markets that you talk about, they're overestimating the growth rates. They are predicting growth in the next year or so of 1.9%. In reality, the Italian economy has been sluggish about 1.1%, and that is why the European Union is concerned about this. And they are concerned that essentially the debt that Italy will rack up is debt that they cannot pay off.
I think what's interesting is they can go stand against the EU in rhetoric. Yes, they can, but can they withstand the markets when the numbers are going down?
Well, or indeed potentially the punitive fines that could well follow in 2019 if Europe stands its ground. But don't be in any doubt, I was in that press conference. Even Italian journalists are seething. Even the journalists, irrespective of what news organisation they're from, seething at this. A lot of people in Europe do see this as a big injustice, do see this as interference, and see this as hypocrisy by the European Union, given the fact that other European Union countries have broken the rules before and not faced consequences. There is a lot of anger in Italy, and that is where Europe needs to be very, very cautious.
All right. Well, we will talk about next one commissioner who is actually really tough on business as well. Let's move on. The EU official I'm talking about, she's known for, holding huge multinationals to task, be it for tax avoidance or breaching European regulations. It's Europe's competition commissioner, Margrethe Vestager. Last July, she fined Google's parent company, Alphabet, 4.3 billion euros for illegally using its internet search engine dominance to promote its other products. Back in August 2016, she slapped Apple with the biggest tax fine in history. The US giant had to back pay 13 billion euros plus interest to the Irish government. And in October 2017, Vestager squeezed 250 million euros in back taxes out of Amazon. And recently, she has been rumored as a possible candidate for Jean-Claude Juncker's job, although domestic politics back in Denmark makes that far from a sure thing. Right, well, I did speak to her earlier, and this is what she said.
Well, my job is to protect consumers. European consumers have a choice. And also affordable prices, even when we pay with our data, that things are, that there is a balance in the relationship. So we protect consumers. This is what we protect. And this is why we need competition. Because if a business knows that I'm being challenged by another business, then they do their best to serve consumers.
Competition, but protectionism in itself, that is not a very good word in an open marketplace, isn't it?
Oh, no, it's not. And this is, of course, why we don't engage in protectionism. But the thing is that if you want to be in the European market, well, you follow the European rule book. And businesses, they can do wonderful business in Europe. So it has nothing to do with protectionism. It has to do with vibrant competition.
So what about the competition rules? Do you think that they are keeping up to date with the changes in the business models, which tend to be very fast in the tech world?
Well, that's a very good question. And we've been asking ourselves the same thing. So I asked 3 special advisors to, think into this. We have asked for contribution from the outer world. And we have a conference next year exactly to be able to answer that question in substance, because with fast-moving markets, new business models, new ways of doing business, of course we need to make sure that competition rules are up to it.
Post-Brexit, will the Commission have less power to go after the UK? Is that why there's a rush to get this done before Brexit?
Well, of course, now the UK is a member as any other member and have cases as any other member state can have cases. Of course, it will be best to have done the cases before the UK leaves. What the future will bring, I don't know, because right now there is no agreement.
Are you anti-tech, a technophobe?
Oh, no, not at all. I think of myself as a savvy user, and I come from a country which is highly digitalized. So no, on the contrary, but to get the best from tech also need competition.
And Donald Trump says you hate the US. I think you're focusing on US companies. What do you say to that?
Well, I come from a country, probably the most sort of pro-US country in Europe. And I even took my family to the US to celebrate my 50th birthday. So, no, actually, on the contrary, I like the US very much.
Are you planning to go up against more giants? Is that in your plans?
Well, we react, of course, to what happens in the marketplace. And some of the cases that we've had, they come because U.S. companies complain about other U.S. companies in the way they do business in Europe. And this is why we have all these cases, because something is not as it should be. And this is the job.
Can you keep your job?
Well, that remains to be seen. It depends on the Danish Prime Minister.
What about Jean-Claude Juncker's job? Do you still have your eye on Jean-Claude Juncker's job?
Well, right now he has it. So... Well, I have said that I would like to stay on as Commissioner for Competition because we have things to do and we're in the middle of something. So this is what I would like to.
Okay, quick fire. I will say some names or words, and can you please tell me one word, the first word that comes to mind? Okay, Apple CEO Tim Cook.
Unpaid taxes to be paid.
That's more than one word. Mark Zuckerberg.
Facebook.
Google.
Impressive search machine.
Donald Trump.
U.S. President.
Really? Do you have another word?
No.
Emmanuel Macron.
He's amazing.
You know, what's interesting there is...
I think two interesting things. First of all, that Emmanuel Macron's amazing, but Donald Trump is only president of the United States. But also, she was not ruling herself out, was she, when she was asked whether she was going to charge?
And you know, Emmanuel Macron actually said that she's extraordinarily brave, and he is running for, you know, his campaigning for the elections on tougher antitrust law. Do you think there's a cozying up? She's going to be out of a job soon, possibly. Do you think there's political cozying up? Well, Emmanuel Macron?
I think what Vestager did, she's an amazing commissioner. She's a member of ALDE. I follow her a lot. I think we're very proud of what she has done as a commissioner. And so Emmanuel Macron is proud on her like we are proud on her.
But you think she hasn't discounted the big job?
Well, I mean, she clearly hasn't, looking at your interview. I mean, she has got a hell of a job, though. You know, it is clear that, you know, many of these companies are now bigger than countries, and it is only on supranational level that you can stand up to them. The way that you can do it and how they can curb without impinging on people's individual freedoms, well, that's a big, big task.
But she really did a great job, I think. Everybody is very proud of her.
Big supporter, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, it's time now for tonight's Power Play, and it comes courtesy of France's far-left politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Remember this? Anti-corruption investigators raided the home and offices of Jean-Luc Mélenchon as part of an investigation into the alleged misuse of European Parliament funds. It did not go down well then. And it seems he's still caught up about it. The far-left leader addressed his followers in a lengthy Facebook Live last night, one of many. He hit out at the press and the authorities.
Ni contre la police. Mais par contre, il y a une partie de la justice qui est contre nous, parce que le gouvernement a décidé de nous mener de cette guerre incroyable que vous avez eu sous les yeux.
He's accusing the French president of undermining his movement and says it's a political witch hunt, but others say it's all an elaborate strategy to help him get ahead in next year's European elections. What do do you say to that? Because some would say any publicity, bad publicity, is still publicity. I mean, we've seen him do that before, even in presidential elections. Is this a strategy? He's just pushing the envelope.
I mean, if it is a strategy, it's one that's, as you said,
it gets in the headlines.
Well, I mean, as accusers have accused him of being one that's been used by people on the right before to concoct these conspiracy theories that everyone is out to get you, the state and the police and the media. His support is dropping quite sharply. I think it's done another 7% in the last month or so. So maybe this is a strategy just simply to get him back in the media, back in the public's attention. You know.
Is that what politicians do, Hilda? Is that how you get headlines?
I don't think it's a good strategy. I think I try to do my job here and to debate on content, but not things like that and reacting like that. If they accuse you for something, you have to work and help the investigation, but not react like that. I don't really like the image of politicians like that. So
we won't be seeing you in a video like that anytime soon.
But it is interesting. Right. I mean, I think we're going to see more of this, not just in France and elsewhere, ahead of the elections next year.
Absolutely, and a lot of rhetoric also coming out. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, debating your data, MEPs take aim at Facebook. Plus, pushing the limits of political decorum. Why some are calling for an end to anonymous quotes after violent comments about Theresa May. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Facebook was firmly in MEP's sights today in Strasbourg. They talked about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which saw 87 million Facebook users' data leaked and used to manipulate voters. MEPs on the left lined up to push for stricter regulation, but several on the right urged for regulatory restraint. All this ahead of Thursday's vote in the Parliament. Take a look at this.
Facebook knows it will need to rebuild its reputation in the eyes of its users. And as politicians, it's not our role to dictate exactly how they do that.
You say Facebook is trying to fix its mistakes. I don't know. I'm not terribly convinced myself, to be honest, because they may have fixed some mistakes because they had to, but they're making new ones in the meantime. They're not mistakes. They're actually deliberately trying to circumvent the law.
We should allow the GDPR time to bed in before we throw the baby out with the bathwater and start to chuck more legislation at the problem.
GDPR is the best privacy law in the world, but if it's not being implemented properly, then it's useless. And I really don't understand how you can stand here and say, I'm terribly worried about what's happening to our democracy, and at the same time try to water down e-privacy. How can you do that? It's hypocrisy.
Really interesting debate going on there. Before that, let's go live now to our social media news desk, theCUBE, where Alex Morgan has been delving deeper into this story. Alex.
Well, Tessa, it was huge news, wasn't it? When the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, that was the story that personal data on 87 million Facebook users had been harvested by this analytics firm called Cambridge Analytica and used for political ends. Crucially, users like you or I would not have known this was going on. And it was that revelation that put the CEO of Facebook before the US Congress, before MEPs, defending his company, saying, we got it wrong, but also pledging that Facebook was going to change. And that debate we were hearing there from MEPs is very much about this. How is Facebook changing, and how does Europe need to confront this problem about protecting personal data? Well, the work of one journalist, Carol Cadwalla, who was really at the centre of exposing that scandal, was her work was central. And today, ahead of this debate and looking at the ongoing issue, I spoke to her and she offered her thoughts about what the greatest implications were. Now, Carol actually played a role in briefing the MEPs ahead of this debate today. And this is what she said was the biggest takeaway for her from her investigation.
I think the most striking outcome was that image of Mark Zuckerberg sitting before Congress and being asked questions. The optics of Facebook cannot be above the law. Facebook must be accountable to lawmakers across the world. And it's still absolutely not. I mean, we certainly know this in Britain, where we have failed to get Mark Zuckerberg, Parliament has failed to get Mark Zuckerberg to come and answer questions.
So I asked her then, OK, so in the UK you failed to get him here. What about Europe? What can Europe really do to take on Facebook? And this was her rallying cry to Europe.
And the thing that I really wanted to get across to the European Union was just that so much was resting upon them. And we know that it's only Europe that really scares these big companies. They see the possible regulation coming from Europe as their biggest existential threat.
So Europe being the biggest existential threat to these tech giants in the eyes of Carol. Well, of course, now the ball is in the court of the MEPs. What will they decide when the discussions stop? That is the question, Tessa.
Indeed it is. Thank you for that, Alex. And with me in the studio to give us their take on where Thursday's vote should go and why, I'm joined by Maltese MEP with the EPP group, Roberta Metsola, and British Conservative MEP Daniel Dalton, whom we also saw in the video earlier in that debate. So, Daniel, I'll start with you. You actually dismissed suggestions that the scandal played a part in the Brexit vote or Donald Trump's election as U.S. president. So you think that Facebook and Cambridge Analytica had no impact in either of those?
No, but I mean, they did have an impact, but the inference that we have here is that the Brexit vote and the Trump vote were just because Facebook basically sent videos and fake videos to people. Now, that's simply not true. What was
I don't think that's the claim, is it?
That's certainly the inference here, and if you saw the debate in depth today, there were a lot of comments that were made along those lines that basically we wouldn't have had Brexit if we hadn't have had this sort of stuff. And that's just what I was trying to explain, that that's not the way it would have gone. What happened with both Brexit and Trump are problems in society that we need to sort out. And if we just put our head in the sand about those problems and say, well, it's Facebook's fault, you're not going to solve the bigger problems that we've got in society.
So where do you think, Roberta, the vote should go?
Well, I think it should send a strong message, as Carol Cadwallader said, and so I want to pay tribute to her work, because she is really a hero in our country, at least, that what happened with Cambridge Analytica, with the fact that so many people's data, 6,000 in Malta alone, were used to harvest data and practices of persons using the way people work online, is unacceptable. The fact that Facebook and its CEO came to the European Parliament did not answer many of the questions will feature heavily in the decisions and the messages that we send. However, on the other hand, we need to make sure that we don't send a message that systems that were created ultimately to be a force for good, and I continue to see social media as being such a system, that it is abused by unscrupulous politicians and their ilk, while at the same time our consumers, our young people, should continue to enjoy their privacy online. So in terms of
regulation, what are you saying?
Well, I think that the GDPR and the privacy legislation that we have actually voted on in this Parliament are strong enough and have sent the right message. They need to be enforced, as MEPs have been saying, but at the same time we need to make sure that, yes, while Google, while Facebook, while the big tech companies are responsible to implement them, let's make sure that such massive legislation does not kill the small companies that can absolutely not be able to live up to the expectations of these regulations. And that's why we have accusations as to whether we are against such legislative initiatives.
But let's hear from the European Commissioner for Justice, Vera Jourova, because she's one of the EU leaders with a reputation for being tough on big tech. A little earlier, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, caught up with her. Take a look.
You talk about Facebook there. Are Facebook and others, are they doing enough now, do you think, to try and stop data breaches like this?
At least they make these declarations that they are doing everything, that they are compliant with the data protection rules in the EU. This is nothing to be believed. This is something to be checked. We have the lessons. We see what happened in America before presidential elections. We have the first results of the investigation that also the Brexit referendum was affected, that the people were manipulated, that there was micro-targeting. So we have to take lessons and we have to behave responsibly to take all the necessary legal measures not to let this happen again. And of course, the European elections are at stake, many other elections on national level. We had the Swedish elections where we have some first results that also there was manipulative content online when the people didn't know that they are subjects of manipulation.
This is widespread.
Every political campaign is a kind of manipulation, but we have to do everything not to enable this manipulation to be based on the abused private data. This is our point.
And are you taking measures right now to stop this interfering with the European elections next year?
First of all, we gave the member states very strong message, apply GDPR and stricter privacy rules. And the second thing, we alerted them to take all necessary measures to be protected against cyber attacks. And the third thing, to do everything to apply the rules for political campaigning, which are now applied in offline world also for online, because more and more political campaigning is shifting to online, and we have to reflect this.
Now, Daniel, you're not a fan of over-regulation, but can we really trust these big tech companies to regulate themselves? I mean, they have the means, the lawyers and the money to avoid regulation, and it's not like we haven't seen that before.
Well, I mean, the first thing is these tech companies, they rely on trust of consumers. If consumers feel that they're not getting what they want or their data is being abused, they're going to leave these companies. You've already seen Facebook lose a certain proportion.
Well, not really, because you're so attached to the network these days. We're so connected, you can't really leave. So isn't it upon companies as well to...
I mean, you can leave. There's a trade-off there. You're getting a service. If you're paying in some way, in a way that you don't want to, you can leave that. But also, I think the key point here is the GDPR was not enforced when the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened. We've already had the response, and the GDPR is the response, and that's still bedding in. We still don't know what the impact of that is going to be. So the message I've always had is not that I'm against legislation, it's just let's see how the GDPR works, let's address it, let's look at it after a year in implementation, and then let's say, okay, how do we make it better?
Okay, so if not, then more regulation, if it doesn't work?
Well, I think more willingness to discuss how to prevent abuse and scandals from happening again. We have seen a lot of declarations from Facebook. We have seen how they've upped their attack on fake news and how they're going to make sure that political campaigns, which we are going to go into, are not overly influenced or are not completely derailed by clips that are absolutely untrue.
There's a question of policing as well, isn't it?
Yes, but I would expect companies like Facebook to also make sure that there's internal policing. If you report something that is incorrect and fake, the takedown policy is proper, it's correct. We have a problem with, for example, the amount of languages that are used on the portal. Is Facebook well equipped to make sure, and here we talk about also the other media platforms, to take down content that is not allowed on platforms like this, because it will influence such voter intentions and such campaigns. And these are things that we need to make sure that we keep the tech giants on their feet. And we can do it from here by requesting that they implement the legislation and not that they can hide behind lawyers and big law firms to get out of it.
All right. It's going to be a continuing debate, because again, once you get into that, you're going to be wondering who's going to put in the standards, who's going to be determining what is fake and what is not. Echo chamber, another debate, definitely. All right, let's move on tonight. You may remember Lithuania's president Dalia Grybauskaitė made the headlines last week. By the way, she described Brexit negotiations. Well, UK opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn attempted to reference that moment in the comments yesterday. It didn't go very well. Let's first take a look at what Dalia Grybauskaitė said and then how Jeremy Corbyn remembered it. That's today's You Said It.
Today, we do not know what they want. They do not know themselves what they really want. That's a problem. We took steps. We need to know what another side wants finally. It is still a great secret.
Prime Minister of Lithuania summed up the situation pretty succinctly when he said, "We do not know what they want. They do not know themselves what they really want. That is the problem."
Prime Minister, President, a he, a she. I mean, that is embarrassing for Jeremy Corbyn.
It's pretty sloppy from Jeremy Corbyn, to be honest. And also, I don't buy the inference of what he was saying as well, in terms of Labour also don't know what their policy is on Brexit. So I think he was trying to make a point that he got wrong and was very sloppy. And actually, the point he's making just also highlights Labour's problem as well.
Reaction for you.
I'm no apologist for Jeremy Corbyn. Sure. Maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but I must say that President Grybauskaitė's inference was pretty accurate, I would say, about the mess that is happening on the other side of the channel. Let me just leave this at that.
we're very clear what our policy is. The Chequers Agreement has gone through Cabinet. That's what we're proposing.
That's a Brexit discussion. We're talking about Jeremy Corbyn's reaction. All right, thank you for that. Coming up next on Raw Politics, knives, nooses, and talk of assassinations. The violent anonymous comments reportedly from politicians about the UK Prime Minister Theresa May. That's coming up next. All right, welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, fresh from the EU summit in Brussels, Theresa May, she came back home empty-handed. And that, she took questions from her MPs, and they were not happy at all with what she had to bring. And she said, though, that a deal is close. Now, this comes just days after hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of pro-EU supporters in London to demand a so-called people's vote on the terms of the Brexit deal. Now, organizers say 700,000 marched through Westminster, which would make it Britain's biggest protest since the campaign against the Iraq War in 2003. I'm joined by our panelists tonight. We have Darren McCaffrey still with us, our political editor at Euronews, and Richard Ashworth. He's a British MEP with the European People's Party. Richard, you were there at the march. What is the goal? I mean, what do people, the 700,000 people on the street, what did they want? Did they really think it would happen?
There were several messages. Primarily, the message was that they want a people's vote. I'm always slightly cautious on that.
Which might be unlikely, is it?
Yes, be careful what you wish for. They want a people's vote, but the main thrust of their message was a deep unhappiness with the way that this is going. A deep unhappiness that the Leave campaign lied to them, it deceived them, it cheated them, and they feel that therefore the referendum was a false premise, and that it is now time, 2 years later, to go back to the people and ask them again. And ask them, not least, because actually Mrs May round the cabinet table is absolutely gridlocked.
I think the problem with this is that, so obviously some people do feel they were lied to during the campaign. I think if the campaign was run again, it's not absolutely certain, in fact, far from it, that we would actually get a different result. I think what Britain does not need now is another divisive referendum campaign, and that's what lots of people would argue. I think what the failure of Brexiteers has been, and why people did take to the streets, is that the winners of this referendum had not built a consensus of trying to take the people who don't want to see this process, but essentially sell them that Brexit will work, that it can be a success, to get people on board. It was divisive in 2016, and it remains as divisive, if not more divisive today. I think that's been a failure of the government and actually of the victors, essentially, in the referendum battle.
Let's talk about...
Absolutely right, because the nation is totally divided. Families, communities, and this was an expression of, don't forget, 48% of the population who didn't vote for that, but of the people who were saying, look, we were promised a dividend, an added value element. There's nothing.
All right, well, let's look at what's actually on the table. Theresa May said it's 95% close to a deal. Are you looking forward to that?
No,
do you believe that?
Because I think it's a bit of a loose expression, say 95% done. Depends what the 5% is. And if that 5% is as huge as the issue which is remaining, which was one party think they want global Britain, which is actually severed the ties with the single market, the customs union, and can trade around the world. The other side are saying, actually, that's going to be an item of self-harm because it will damage British industry. The government's been warned time and time again by CBI, by Jaguar Land Rover and others that it will cost jobs. So therefore, you can either have a customs union or global Britain, but you can't have both. And that's the point, where the rubbing point is, of course, about the borders, but at the end of the day, do you want global Britain or do you want...
You can't have it, that's true, you can't have it both.
I think with when Theresa May said 95% of it's done, what do they always say? Nothing's agreed until everything is agreed, and we're not at that point yet. Clearly the backstop is the major issue. Now, Theresa May has been in the House of Commons today talking about this issue, making it clear, essentially, until they sort out the idea of the backstop, there will be no withdrawal agreement. Essentially, there will be no deal. Now, she's given the impression potentially that there might be wriggle room to change that slightly.
Sure.
But be in no doubt, no MP stood up in the Commons this afternoon and was in support of this extension to the transition period.
We're inching towards the end, but this is not the end. We will be talking about Brexit continuously. All right, it's time for tonight's Raw Moment. It seems that Hungary's Viktor Orban, well, he has a new pet.
Sok nehéz kormányzati munka mellett most végre itt egy könnyed meló. Különleges felkérést kaptam a nyíregyházi állatkerttől, fogadjak örökbe egy rinocéroszt. Ezt meg is tettem, de az örökbefogadás együtt jár a keresztapasággal, most nevet is kell, hogy adjunk neki. Összegyűjtöttem néhány szívemnek kedves lehetőséget. Itt az idő, válasszunk, hétfő reggel 8 óráig várom a szavazatokat. Most nem kell 2/3.
All right, so the winning name we found out is Trotters. I think was the first Hungarian name there. Victor Orban and his rhinoceros.
He's got a thick skin, a bit like his now apparent rhino. But what is it about kind of strongmen and having animals? I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago. Yanukovych had a zoo there. What's the chap from Narcos? His name, I can't remember. The Colombian drug dealer, he also had a zoo. Clearly, I don't know, it's about kind of hard men and animals. Is clearly
Richard, do you have a pet?
Why would it appeal to him that a rhino, a thick-skinned, short-sighted, prehistoric unicorn? Now, I can think of quite a few British politicians fill that category, but the headline one, surely got to be Boris Johnson. Boris for sure.
Oh, I wonder what Boris's pet would be. All right, thank you very much for that, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight on Raw Politics. Tell us what you're thinking. I'm on Twitter @TessaRacilia and also @Euronews. Use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.